Great.
So, hey everybody, I appreciate you guys jumping on to this beautiful Bridges Live webinar series that we're starting with Taylor. We started one last time with three finance folks, but ultimately, I think what's going to drive a lot of this value is having a CFO and a marketing person really talking about one specific company, how they're building the building blocks to driving the right type of growth internally. And so this time we have Tanner Lamb from Cozy Earth, CFO there. He joined us last time, did a great job. You had a lot of fans, a lot of Tanner stands out there. And then I don't know, maybe I'm gonna mess this wrong because is it George?
No, George Davis.
I like Georgie.
Tanner's been saying Georgie, so I was like, I don't really know. Head of marketing at Cozy Earth. Head of marketing at Cozy Earth, George Davis, and of course moderated by none other than Taylor Holiday. And I'm Rohit Benanga. I'm the CEO of Zamp. We do sales tax compliance. I unfortunately cannot jump off this call, otherwise it'll end the webinar, but I will let Taylor take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, man. And Tanner, George, good to have you both with us. So the point of these series, so we had about a month and a half ago, we all met and we had a breakdown that was exclusively with CFOs talking about various elements of how they do financial planning in their organization and how they interact with marketing. And from here, what we're hoping to put together is a series of conversations between a marketing leader and a finance leader inside of a specific brand to discuss various topics. And we're going to pair each episode or interview with one of the episodes that I did in my series Bridges. So if you haven't watched that yet, I would encourage you as you follow along to dive into that, because these interviews will pair with the content from that. And so today is the first episode. And in that first episode of Bridges, we talked about, the episode is titled Redesigning the P&L from a Marketer's Point of View. And the idea of that series was, how can we get more organizations to use the core financial documents as the scoreboard inside of their organization and educate people around what is ultimately the measure that most organizations are using to define their value. And so we talked about ways that we could simplify chart of accounts and different things. And so today we're going to talk specifically to the folks at Cozy Earth, both Tanner and George, to discuss how they communicate in their organization around the financial results, financial plans, how they incentivize their organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So two things for you. If you stay till the end, we have a sample P&L design that I outlined in that episode that I will share with you as a link for you to review and apply inside of your own organization at the end. And then I would also encourage you to go check out that video. But to start, let's kick it off with some introductions. Let them tell you a little about themselves. As Rohit said, Tanner we took a little poll at the end. He was a fan favorite. I don't know what it was about his last appearance, but he got a lot of praise. So he's back today. So Tanner, why don't you start? Who are you, sir? And why are you here?
Yeah, finance and accounting people are boring people. And so if you throw in one or two jokes over the course of an hour, you become, cool in that group of folks. So I am, I guess, one of the less boring accountants. I'm still boring.
Well, you or an accountant with access to Chat GPT, one of the two, because that's where you told me you Googled a couple of jokes, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, so Tanner Lamb, CFO at Cozy Earth. I've been here almost 4.5 years. We've had some really good growth over that time, thanks to George and his team and kind of the combination of hopefully a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. But yeah, in my role, we also have operations that rolls up through me, supply chain, data, kind of post-purchase operations. And so get a really broad assortment of things that I get to work on every day. So it's really fun. Yeah, excited to talk with you guys today.
Thanks. George.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. George Davis. I've been at Cozy Earth for 6 years. When I started, we had like 5 employees. And so I've been able to see a lot of the growth here and the good and the bad that comes with that. And, Tanner and I have learned some hard lessons. We're hoping to just share some of those learnings today. So thanks for having us, Taylor.
So that's a very monotone, professional intro. I like that tone of voice from you. So George and I know each other from some golf tournaments that we've played together. And I think that's a good lead in for me explaining why I have a black eye here. So you're probably going, what's going on, Taylor? You got some sort of conjunctivitis here? No, I took a 7-iron to the side of the face from my son in the golf simulator this past week. So I'm wearing a black eye for that. And I was practicing to continue to beat George every time we play on the course together. But today, we are not here to discuss that. We are here to talk about the relationship between finance and marketing. And I've had the chance to get to know both Tanner and George and Cozy Earth over the last few months, and thoroughly impressed with the relationship that they have. I think they are a model for how the intimate working relationship between these two sides of an organization should exist. So I'm excited to learn from them today a little bit. And so we're going to bounce back and forth between asking them questions, but we really want to think about and focus on how you two coordinate to move your organization towards its goals. So Tanner, I'm going to start with you. And my first question is, what financial documents do you share with George and the marketing team, and how are they presented?
Yep. Yeah, it's a good question. I'll start off with first kind of praise our internal marketing folks. Marketers maybe get a bad rap for not being numbers people. That's not true at Cozy Earth. The marketing teams here love the numbers. They're performance marketers, so they live and die kind of by how marketing is performing. So they're already numbers driven, and so teaching or educating the group on the P&L or on the financial statements has been, I would say, easier than I expected, because of their attitude and approach towards it. So in talking about kind of documents that we share, there's really a few key ones that I'll go through. The annual forecast, we do this every year. Groups come together, we create a forecast. I mentioned this last time on the webinar that we did, but really our supply chain team comes up with a bottoms up forecast, like how are we going to move SKUs through our sales channels. The marketing team kind of comes more with a forecast based on a cohort analysis for retention revenue, and then our aimer and spend projections on acquisition revenue. And then I'll kind of give my 2 cents based on kind of global macro factors or retail sales forecasts in general. And then we'll kind of come to a consensus number there. Then from there, really the accounting and finance team take over after we come to a consensus revenue and put together a P&L forecast for the year. So we go over that. The marketing and finance teams meet weekly. We'll review that from time to time, but monthly we go over a profit and loss statement that's presented in the way you would think. It's our financial statements we go through and talk really kind of based on the 4-quarter accounting, Taylor, that you reference all the time, where we're looking at our cost of delivery, our sales and marketing costs, or our CAC, customer acquisition costs. We go through OpEx, and then did we make money or lose money? And we do that monthly. And then from there, really cash flow every now and then. Our businesses, if you're an e-commerce, businesses are super cash intensive because you're buying inventory before you sell it sometimes, and need a lot of cash to keep growing. And then kind of in between there is just the financial and marketing metrics dashboards that the data team and Trevor really provide, that we look at daily, that affects how we spend, our decision making, things like that. So between the financial forecast, the monthly P&L, the cash flow forecast, and kind of our daily metrics and dashboards we look at, that's kind of the delivery of those to the marketing team.
That's awesome. So you guys are really transparent then in terms of being able to spread that, which I think is an awesome principle for organizations to adapt. So George, I'm curious, 2 things for you then as a follow-up is, one, where did you get your understanding of finance? Is that in your background? Is there how did you go about making those documents familiar to you in a way that you could understand them? And then when you receive them, how do you think about translating the state of the financial state of the company to your team? How do you translate those results into marketing language?
Yeah, great question. It is not in my background. I have no background. This was kind of my first job outside of school. So I think, we operated without Tanner for 2 years while I was here, and we didn't have any internal finance team. And so that kind of forced us to learn. And, I think that kind of set the foundation for at least my thinking on the finance side. And then Tanner came in 2 years later, and we kind of learned together. And, we watch your podcast, to be honest, like, and other people's podcasts, and, start to understand what's important for an e-commerce business. And so, yeah, no background, but I think just some of it's common sense if you really sit back and think about it. And we were running, for the years prior to Tanner, like, cash was really tight. And so we didn't have a lot of room for errors. And, I think that forced us to kind of learn how to do it. As far as your second question, which is how do I deliver that to our marketing team? I think Tanner hit on it. Like, we have a weekly meeting with finance, with all of the marketing leaders in the room. We go through the cash forecast. We go through our forecast from a revenue standpoint, from a spend standpoint. And I think everyone on my team at least really understands like how missing those targets, revenue or spend, impacts our cash position. You know, I think Tanner's done a good job training us up on that. We go through the P&L on a monthly basis. You know, as he mentioned, we have Domo built out with a daily contribution number, a daily net profit number. So I think, you know, I mean, to Tanner's credit, like he's done a good job training us and all that, and we are all very, very mindful of it. So
that's awesome. So one of the things that I want to hit on in these series is to give people a sense of how different various e-commerce businesses can be comprised and still reach profitability. There's no one way to do it. There's some that are, I'd say, very high gross margin, lean OpEx. Like there's lots of different ways to comprise a business. So Tanner, one, can you give us whatever you can about the current scale of Cozy Earth so people can get a sense of what we're talking about? And then if you broke down, let's say just a general estimate around year-to-date P&L across these 4 categories from a percentage standpoint. So cost of delivery, CAC, OpEx, profit, what do you guys at? What do you target? How do you think about the construct of your business from a financial standpoint?
Yeah, great question. So Cozy Earth, 9+ figure brand, the majority of that revenue, the vast majority of that revenue, all derived from our site online. And so very channel focused in website, have a couple partnerships, looking for opportunities to expand channels through our own retail stores and through other retail stores. So trying to diversify kind of our channel revenue makeup. Yeah, with that, you know, things have changed over time. As you grow, you get a little bit more maybe purchasing power with suppliers, and so you have the ability to change your cost of goods on the supplier side. We get better ship rates because we ship so much, and so there's some things that we can do to lever some of our cost of delivery, and then I guess big picture, what we're trying to do here at Cozy Earth is grow top line revenue as much as we can while maintaining a certain level of profitability. For us, you know, a few years ago, that might have been 3 or 4%. Now, you know, we creep that up higher and higher. I think the goal within the next couple of years is, can we push that number to 15%? You know, I don't know, in talking with a lot of other companies, depending on how you reach your audiences, maybe it's a little bit more organic. We're paid heavy. We're very heavy paid acquisition. And so we try to create as much opportunity to spend on marketing as possible. So that may be a little bit different than some other brands, but that's really what we're trying to do, is how can we grow as much as possible while still maintaining a certain level of profitability? So from a 4-quarter accounting perspective, our cost of delivery, and this changes month to month, right? In June, which is generally, at least for us, a slower time of year, we don't have a lot of like summer focused products or warm weather focused products, although we have added some over time. But June's, you know, in the summer months are maybe a little bit slower, really good around the holidays. So I'll give you some ranges on how that plays out from a month-to-month basis. So our cost of delivery will range anywhere from 36 to 41%, depending on time of year in the month. There's some kind of fixed costs in delivery, storage costs of inventory, things like that make it, it's not truly variable with sales, but for the most part it is. And then marketing spend, that will range broadly. Once again, depending on time of year, it might be for us 35% of revenue. It could go up to 50% of revenue, depending on time of year. We try to keep it closer to 40%. So I guess from what we want to be and where we are, those are two different things. On the cost delivery side, we'd like to be 36, 37%. On the marketing side, we'd love to keep it around 40%. And then OpEx, we'd like it to be 10 or sub 10%. So we run really lean from an OpEx perspective to drive the ability to put as many dollars to marketing as possible and to customer acquisition as possible. So maybe a little bit different than other groups run, but that's kind of how we break it out, you know. So yeah, we'd love to be 36, 40, 10, 9 or 10 on OpEx, and then 15% on the net side.
So this is where this is so immensely valuable for the people here, is that it is so important to understand these compositions and how you think about how your specific business might relate to this. And I want to point out some unique things that I think are the reason why, from my outside perspective, Cozy Earth has that composition. One is that you guys don't have a super high LTV. Okay. So if you think about your product category, bedding, you're getting more into apparel. So I think that that's, a growth area. But for now, bedding, I would say represents is it fair to say the vast majority of the revenue comes out of that product category for you guys?
It's the majority, but it's no longer the vast majority though.
Okay, so growing and expanding, but still LTV somewhere, this isn't a consumable. We're not going to compound the existing customer base at a really fast rate. What that means is that every month, George and team are going to have to go out and prospect new customers aggressively to keep the brand growing, which is a continually more expensive exercise over time, which means that the way that you can keep doing that is by remaining lean on the OpEx side and having good gross margin. You combine those things, it allows you to fund the growth that's necessary to go out and acquire those new customers all the time. So if you're listening, one, there's lots of narratives around the viability of D2C as a business, blah, blah, blah. You're talking to a very large D2C business that has done this, but it is very intentionally thought through in the way that the business is comprised to enable that kind of growth. So if you're not a business where your existing customer base is going to compound at 100 to 200% annually, and you're going to have to go out every month and acquire new customers at a continually higher scale, the way to do that is to fund growth at a way that still protects profitability by having lean OpEx, good margin. So you won't find a business in these kinds of product categories that have a giant OpEx and poor margins because it won't work. Whereas if they were able to produce massively increased existing customer revenue off of the compounding, then that's going to widen the margin on their revenue a little faster. But it's just, again, each business is unique in this way. So that really means that, George, you and your team carry a pretty heavy burden in the sense that every month you've got to go out and acquire a massive amount of growth. And a lot of that has to do with how you think about the deployment of that CAC or acquisition. So how do you think about, we have two questions. First, I want to talk about the CAC because it is such a big part of the revenue. That means you're responsible for what is really the largest line item in the organization by a substantial margin. So how do you think about your responsibility as it relates to both the overall MER and the P&L that you're protecting, as well as maybe how that relates to new customer acquisition and the efficiency required to fuel future growth as well?
Hard question. Yeah, let me think about this one for a sec, Taylor. So the way we think about it is like, and you hit on this, right? So in 2020, we kind of sat down and had an aha moment, like, okay, if we were to maintain OpEx, right, that's going to give us, let's say we're 30% on marketing spend in 2020, right? If we maintain OpEx, that's going to give us 5 more points that we can spend on marketing. And that continues as the business grows. And I think a lot of people maybe overlook that. They think the best path to growth is to hire more people. And probably for a lot of e-com brands, the best thing to do is try to maintain OpEx and then give yourself more points on the marketing budget. So I think that's something that we've done over the years. Like our CAC target, as we've scaled, has increased drastically from 2020 to this year because we've seen those efficiencies of scale as the business has grown and we've maintained OpEx. So that's important. I do think, like, how do I view going back, this is something Tanner hammers on us, right? Like if we come with we want to make a new hire, for example, or we want to pay a consultant or, something like that. We have to prove that, let's say we have a 20% contribution margin or a 10% contribution margin, depending on the time of the year, that if we pay $10,000 for this software, it needs to produce $100,000 in additional revenue each month. Right. And I think a lot of people overlook that. You see the software, you're like, okay, $10,000, that's not that much money. But when you consider the contribution margin produced by each dollar of revenue, it actually does equate to a lot. So, I think that's really important as you approach your job. As far as like budget allocation and deploying spend across channels, that's become increasingly more difficult. And I know this is something you and I have talked about recently, but like, as you grow, your dollars just become less efficient. Certain audiences become saturated, and there are less opportunities for scalable budget. And so, this year we're trying to get creative with that. We've done it over the last few years. We found new ways to grow each year, but it's not getting easier. And I don't have like a great answer. I think that's something that we're trying to figure out in our current state. So anyway, I hope that answers your questions there.
Yeah, well, I think you're hitting on the key, which is that to afford yourself the exploratory process of discovering how to go find more profitable dollars in growth, you're able to create a buffer, an error margin by being really thoughtful about where else you commit dollars. And oftentimes, if you know that, hey, next month I have to go out into, when I think about media buying, there's sort of like the amount of money I know I can spend profitably. And then there's that sort of next frontier where I'm going exploring or discovering. And I should expect that phase to be wrought with inefficiency as I'm trying to find the next tranche of growth. And to afford yourself that space, being lean gives you that margin of error to do so. A lot of times I watch brands get stuck where they can't go try something new because the opportunity cost of every dollar is death. Like, and when you're in that place, that's how you get stuck in, I can't ever expand beyond these like lower funnel initiatives, because if I go out and explore and that dollar is inefficient at all, my cash is upside down and I'm dead because my OpEx is too high, my margin's poor, whatever it might be. So you guys have created for yourself the opportunity to go explore other areas by being efficient in that part of your business. So the other thing I want to ask George, and this is sort of counter to what is normally your job, which is to think about the efficiency of the dollars that you spend. But you guys now have a pretty broad category mix where the margin profile is different, the return rates are different, the LTV by product category is different. How much do you see your job as contributing to the overall gross margin in any given period of time versus just the CAC? Like, how much do you think about product mix when you're selling versus just efficiency of media dollars?
Yeah, more and more. I think in the early days, it's like you dump budget into what's working, and that's what we did. And Meta does that on its own now. So like that happens naturally. And so if you're not aware of, okay, our different product categories have different margin profiles, it's easy to neglect that. And you hit on this, but we have grown a lot from a product category standpoint, and our revenue mix is actually pretty diversified. I think, Tanner, correct me if I'm wrong, but like 50 to 60% of our product sales are bedding, and then the remaining 50% is spread out over the other categories. So I think as we've grown from a product standpoint, like we have had to be more mindful of that. And this year, that's been more of a focus, is just trying to drive gross margin by being mindful with our product that we're pushing, whether that's through Meta, whether that's in our email calendar. Like there are opportunities, whether it's on our website, like there are opportunities for marketers to drive the product mix. But you can't just optimize to what's most efficient. You have to bake in that thought of like, okay, what has the highest gross margin? Are we considering that? And I think as you just practice that exercise of thinking about that when you're making decisions, like you will see improvements in the gross margin. So I think we do own that, and it's something that we're trying to own more and more of as we move forward.
Yeah, I'll
Tanner,
just add to that,
yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the things that George's team has done really well, a much better job of lately, we historically, as we were growing, if you're a growing brand or you're a cash strapped brand, inventory is really challenging, right? And getting the right inventory mix relative to what you're selling. So we have now about 7,000 active SKUs, which is crazy because when I started, we had about 350 active SKUs. So our SKU count has grown significantly, and we used to just spend into whatever works. And now George and his team, they take into account inventory levels, right? If pajama ads are working super well and we run out of pajamas, that's not good for anyone, frankly. And so it's not good for the customer because we can't get them the product they want. So we have to kind of lever marketing spend and ad spend to, what do we have in stock? What do we have a lot of? Where's the margin best? And I feel like that, I guess, the dynamic nature of those things, George and his team, frankly, have done an increasingly better job as time has gone on because we've had to, or we stock out and we piss customers off and we, make our fulfiller mad and things like that. So that's been a really positive thing, but it takes, forethought, time, effort to do.
So that's great. That was just what I was going to come to next, is how does the balance sheet play into thinking about this? Because one of the things, especially in a category where you guys are getting into apparel, where as the SKU counts and variants begin to stack, you'll find that it's not just about the stuff that you run out of, it's also about the stuff that you end up with too much of. And there becomes what I would call cash-based marketing, where we're no longer in the initiative of just driving a P&L level outcome. We're trying to drive a balance sheet level outcome. We're trying to turn some dead or aging inventory back into cash that we can make another bet, right? And maybe go out and produce better margin in the future. So talk to me about how you guys interact around the balance sheet and the inventory position, and then how your team turns that into tactical adjustments as you go. George, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So yeah, we have made some changes in that area. Like we never had an issue with excess inventory. We've always had the opposite issue until, I don't know, 2022. And so we've made some bad purchases, and we have had like over, a year, 2 year, 3 year supply of certain products. And so we have had to introduce some tactics. And I know some of our listeners have taken advantage of we made too much sale. We do that on like a monthly cadence usually. And that's one thing we do. We have a clearance funnel that we run through Meta that performs really well. So we are mindful of, okay, where do we have excess? How do we help move that? We have a monthly meeting with our SNOP, our Trevor. I don't know what his technical role is, Tanner, you can fill me in, but he basically handles our forecasting and our inventory, and we meet and we discuss SKUs that are heavy and how to move those. So that's something that we do. I mean, that pretty much is the extent of how we're trying to move that excess. Yeah.
So Tanner, I'd be curious, one of the things I've watched some large organizations struggle with is there's these sort of potentially conflicting incentives for the marketing team around efficiency goals. And then all of a sudden they're tasked with liquidating or moving inventory. And now it becomes this like, wait a second, that's actually counter to my incentive. How does that affect my overall result? And a lot of that has to do with the capitalization of the organization and how urgent it is to turn things back into cash as it relates to it. So how can you talk a little bit about how you guys are capitalized generally? It sounded like you started out bootstrapped, but maybe now you have more credit facilities that allow for more space. How do you think about how your capital position relates to those initiatives and how long you're willing to hold inventory that maybe isn't moving as fast as you wanted?
Yeah. So great question. That's changed over time, right? So 4.5 years ago, we were a lot more cash strapped. We didn't have excess issues. And so it was really what lever points do we have to be able to get as much cash as possible so that we can pay for inventory with other people's money, at least upfront, and not have to pay cash out of our bank account until we've kind of sold it. So we had to create, I guess, a bridge in that sort of sense from, hey, your cash conversion cycle might start at month 1 where you're paying a deposit on inventory that's being made in China. You're not going to get that inventory until month 4 or 5, and then you have a month to sell that inventory before you get the cash. So you might be 6 months before you've invested this money and you actually got the money back from your cash conversion cycle. So we did have a small credit facility at the bank. It was personally guaranteed, which is a little bit scary because your personal credit, home, assets are on the line. And that was through one of our, kind of founder investors. The business was started with a tiny bit of seed capital and really just bootstrapped from there, raised a little bit of equity capital in 2017, but we're talking a couple $100,000 just to buy inventory. And as the brand grew and as you grow profitably, you create your own capital. And so there was a time period where we used a freight forwarder called Flexport, and they have a program where essentially you can borrow for 45, 90, 120 days based on your profile with them. And we utilized that very, very heavily. It was expensive. At the time, it was, 8 or 9%, which now is not expensive. But at the time, it was kind of expensive for us. And then as we've grown, we've graduated to a borrowing-based facility with the bank and now an asset-based line of credit with the bank. And so as you get bigger and if you grow profitably, and I'd say that's the key to this whole thing, people will give you money when you don't really need the money, and they're less willing to give you money when you really, really need the money. So you have to be disciplined enough to be making at least some money at any given time, so that frankly banks or vendors might give you a little bit better terms, or maybe you have a private credit facility, but you really kind of have to show some degree of profit in order to get those facilities. And now, the majority of the year we just operate on our own cash. We make heavy inventory investments around the holidays. We may or may not use line of credit, just depending on how things go from here to there. So it really depends. The biggest thing is you've got to create your own capital. And the way to create your own capital is by being profitable and running a profitable business. And even that sometimes, though, isn't enough to keep up with, hey, I'm growing, I got to buy more inventory. So you have to find, people that believe in you. If you can't raise investment dollars, trying to raise debt dollars, at least finding some people that believe in you. And frankly, sometimes it's just expensive, and that costs of running business and the cost of growing. And so Now, we're fortunate enough to really try to operate just on our own cash balance. And I think that's a testament to the discipline over a long period of time, though.
When you think about, and have you ever had to, as part of a consideration for the efficiency targets of your media dollars, had to have a consideration for cost of capital in that, or has it always been enough? And how would you recommend people consider those? Because I think a lot of times what gets lost when people set their efficiency targets, and there's a lot of templates out there, and we contribute to this of like, oh, your fuel profit calculator, and here's your cost of delivery and shipping, et cetera. But what's often missed in there is that somewhere along the way, whether it's on the inventory side or on the capital side, that there's additional interest relative to those charges that are sort of getting lost in setting the expectations. So have you guys ever had to consider the cost of capital or the interest rate on some of that lending in your efficiency targets? And do you and George communicate around that, or has it never really been an issue?
Yeah. So I would say we deal with it internally on our end. I'll give you an example right now. So, to our bank line of credit, which is good, it's good rate. We're still going to pay 7.5% on that. Right. And so if I'm holding inventory at our 3PL, we use a 3PL to fulfill, in April, we write off $350K of inventory because the cost of capital, the cost to pay for the freaking storage, and then the cost that I guess I can't reutilize somewhere else to deploy capital more productively. We just go, okay, donate that, give it to the Ronald McDonald House, get rid of, let's find opportunities to donate and give this inventory away so that we're not holding it in a place that's actually costing us more money over time. Additionally, anytime, at least in the market right now, you're tying up dollars, you're missing out on 4.5% roughly that you could be getting if the cash was in your bank and you're utilizing some type of interest-bearing account. So let's just say cost of borrowing is 10%. The interest you could make is 4%. There's this 6% delta, right, between those two. And you've got to figure out, and yes, we consider it. Back when it was probably a bigger issue for us, interest rates were in ZIRP, right, environment. And so the cost of debt was a lot lower than it is now. So we are not thinking about it as much because we're in a position where, cash is strong and we're making money on that cash and we're not necessarily borrowing. But there have been times 100% where we're making decisions based on, I guess, the arbitrage, the difference between the cost to borrow and essentially the price we get paid for cash. So yes, not a very clear answer. We make decisions based on that. But frankly, we're fortunate to be in a position where as interest rates have gone up, we have needed debt less and less.
Yeah. There's a really interesting dynamic right now, like you said, because you can get 4.5% to 5% on, basic CDs, and that if you think about that as a leverage point for negotiation with a supplier, that if you can get to terms that are net 60, net 90, and you offer them 6% more per unit, you can really almost offset the entirety of that cost with the interest you could earn on that float.
Yeah.
And so it's like you could get to this like cash conversion cycle. So in each moment, there's opportunities to leverage the dynamics of the surrounding environment to create the best circumstance that as that environment changes, and now all of a sudden that 60 to 90 days is really valuable as you need cash. So that's something to definitely consider. All right, George, I'm coming back to you because you touched on it earlier, and that's that as you've scaled, the complexity of your media mix has grown. You guys advertise in lots of channels. As you communicate to Tanner, one of the biggest like gaps that I see when marketing goes to talk to finance, they talk in proxy metrics. So what's a proxy metric? Well, ROAS is a proxy metric, right? It's intended to represent return on ad spend, but it's usually reported either in some third-party tool or in an individual platform that doesn't directly relate to money in the bank account or money on the P&L. And so there tends to be distrust that gets sown there. There's incentives that can conflict around representing better performance than maybe there actually is. How do you communicate to Tanner about the efficiency of your media dollars? What is the language you guys use? And how have you found that to be most successful for you as a marketing leader in speaking with him?
Good question. This is something we're working on right now. I think over the years, Tanner has been pretty trusting, whether he should be or shouldn't be, I don't know. But he lets us, deploy budgets or deploy dollars where we think is best. And that doesn't mean we don't have discussions around it. And we do talk about it. We talk through performance targets, but we don't deliver like a hey, here's a ROAS by channel. Where do you think we should put budget, Tanner? Because there is so much nuance and context that's missing. So if we're going to have that discussion, it's a longer discussion, and we go through the context and we talk through how, different channels measure, differently, and how attribution, we talk through all that with Tanner. And luckily he listens to your podcast. He's a big, common thread guy. He has been. So he'll come to us with, hey, I heard this, or he has a pretty good understanding of how the channels differ. And, but yeah, it's something that's ongoing. And, as you introduce channels like podcasts or SiriusXM or influencer, even like the measurement is so different than a Meta or a Google. Like it's important for him to understand that as we allocate budget, because if he were just to see the numbers and say, okay, like your direct ROI on a podcast is 0.5, and in Meta it's a 3, like, what are you idiots doing? Like that would be the conversation. So it is vitally important for him to understand that and how that works. And so we do spend a decent amount of time, and are now spending more time going through those channels, answering his questions, answering the other members of his team's questions, and making sure that we're all aligned on how we view attribution. And then, you can introduce tools, which we're talking to you right now about Measured. And, so maybe that helps, create some sort of measurement solution that and considers multiple channels rather than one. So anyway, I think there's multiple ways to go around that. I just think, over communicate the context and nuance of each marketing channel to your finance leaders.
Love that. I think there has to be sort of like a mutual interest in each other's worlds in a way that allow you to access into it. So Tanner, what do you think? What have you found to be useful? And then the next question is, what do you think marketers fail to consider also when speaking with finance that they would be better to consider as well?
Yeah. So I think George nailed a lot of the things. Like I'm very interested in the outcome of Cozy Earth, whatever that means, right? The outcome could be, hey, we hit our numbers this month. The outcome could be, hey, we sell for a good amount of money one day. We are all interested in the outcome of Cozy Earth. And I think because of that, I have to educate myself on marketing. I was not in e-commerce before coming to Cozy Earth. So I was learning terms. I'm still learning terms all the time. I feel like I'm learning that, hey, affiliate revenue is pixel-based tracking. Or how we take and we triangulate around the post-purchase survey and how that affects like how we actually view performance in a channel, right? And there has to be a mutual interest in that. Like I have to be willing to listen to your podcast, listen to, other podcasts. I have to be willing to read and try to learn about marketing, because if not, I can't have intelligent conversations and to some extent, hold people accountable to dollars going out the door, right? And so George has nailed it. Like we are spending, especially the last few weeks, maybe an inordinate amount of time going through each channel so that I can understand it. And frankly, they probably feel like they're babying me a little bit, because I'm like, what does this mean? Things that maybe I should know that I'm having to ask about, but I'm not too prideful to say, hey, I don't actually know what this is. So talk me through that. And I'll pose questions, and some of them are probably stupid. Some of them are useful. But it's how I need to go about learning. And it's probably, not dissimilar to maybe George or a marketer's approach. Like you ask questions that may seem very basic to me, but frankly, we speak different languages. And so I've got to understand and be willing to be understood across that. So I'd say it has to be effort. You'll get out what you put in. If you put in a lot of effort to figure out and try to understand, you'll get a lot out of it. And then you have to talk with people smarter than you about what those things mean. So that's kind of how we work. And I am fortunate, or we are fortunate, that George and I have a good relationship, both on a personal level and a professional level. And so there's just a level of comfort where I can say, what the hell are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. And he can say that to me, or say, shut the hell up. You don't know what you're talking about. And so there is that level of comfort and candid feedback between us. And if you're in marketing, if you're in finance, you've got to build that rapport with each other, or it's miserable, because it's hard. It's hard, and you just got to choose your hard. You can choose to have hard conversations, or you can choose the consequences of poor performance. And we'll choose to have hard conversations. Okay, long story short.
No, I love it. One of the things that I think that is useful for if you're an employee in an organization, you're listening, and you're not the finance leader or the marketing leader. The reason I think access to the P&L is so important is if you can take immense interest in the part of the organization where that organization spends the most money and get as close to the money as you can, you will begin to be connected to the thing that has the greatest value potential, and that you will begin to understand your way to create the most value. So inside of Cozy Earth, we already said in any given month, you broke down 4-quarter accounting. What I'm always looking for is which section's the largest percentage. And if I'm anywhere in the organization and I see 35% is marketing dollars, then I understand that if I can improve the efficiency or value or understanding of that portion of the dollars, I can make a big impact inside of this company. The same thing could be true if in some cases, gross margins 50% and the cost of goods is where a lot of the costs sit in this organization. I want to understand that. Why? What is unique about our business? Why is that comprised there? What are the limitations in creating more efficiency? Could I think about ways to do that? Understand in your organization that curiosity. And so if you're a finance leader and marketing's most of your money, you better damn well be curious about understanding it, because that's what your job is, to produce it. So as we were getting on the call, we were joking because George never inputs his golf scores into Gin because he has an incentive that's incorrectly set to do so, which is that he can pretend like he's a worse golfer than he is and try and take money from people. It's a bad incentive. And if there's anything I've learned in this world, it's that incentives drive organizational behavior more than anything. And what I often see as the number one conflict between marketing and finance is the financial incentive of the employees. They are misaligned in some way towards some outcome. So I'd love to hear from each of you how you think about your team's incentive, your as leaders' incentive, and how do you make sure that the financial benefit of the employee matches the benefit of the organization? And how often do you guys check in on that or work through that to make sure that you're moving and motivating people towards the thing you care about? Tanner, I'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about your financial incentive and George's, and then we'll come to George and his team?
Yeah, I think on a high level, obviously we have to work towards the same strategy. We know there's the base level expectation on profit, on being able to make money and grow at the same time. So we try to align us incentives, and frankly need to do a better job aligning incentives. George does a good job trying to find incentives that work. I do a good job of asking a lot of questions and going like, oh, that seems like a lot. But I think at the end of the day, we're trying to grow revenue and profitably. And so incentives with each department have to be aligned to profitable revenue growth. So George and I, personally have financial incentives that, hey, if we are able to maintain and increase profitability over the year while growing an acceptable amount, like there's compensation that comes from that. And that's kind of how we approach it for each individual person. Hey, what are their controllables, and what's the base minimum return we need to see out of that group? And that's kind of how we approach it. Obviously, with any organization, if you can align, with the equity holders or the shareholders and potentially become a shareholder, that's the ultimate alignment, because you're trying to build to the same outcome, which is how do we maximize enterprise value? And so
do you guys have any ESOP or option program?
We do. Yep. We do have that. And, both George and I participate in that. And so at the end of the day, we're trying to drive long-term enterprise value to the business. Admittedly, that's our biggest financial incentive, and every single business that operates, in my opinion, this may seem a little harsh, should operate to produce capital and a return to shareholders. And those are the most successful businesses. Those are the businesses that can employ people at the highest levels of compensation. It's profitable businesses. If you don't run a profitable business, it's hard to pay people appropriate amounts over a long period of time. And so that's kind of how I think about business in general, is businesses are there to make a profit, to deliver customer value, and get compensated for that value. So yeah, we do have some incentives that way that are aligned, that some people at Cozy Earth get to participate in. And I think over the long term, more and more people will also participate in.
George, how do your incentives align, and how do you think about your team matching to that?
Yeah, Tanner kind of hit on it. I send proposals to Tanner at the end of the year, or at the beginning of the year, and we bake in, okay, here's the company's targets. We want to grow at X rate. We want to exceed X profit margin at the end of the year. And if those things are hit, then they get paid out their incentives. So to be frank though, like, it's not a huge part of our compensation plan for a lot of our employees. Like, it's relatively new as well. I think last year was the first year we actually did incentives. So it hasn't been a huge piece of what we do. I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts on how you think we should approach that, because I think it's something that we could improve on for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I've just found over and over that as I go into organizations and we get to see a lot of different ones, that the primary conflict is created between everybody's behaving in rational self-interest, and their rational self-interest follows their financial incentive. And if you go and look under the hood, what you realize is this media buyer has a ROAS goal, and this director has a profit goal, and this person has a top line revenue growth goal. And so all that's happening is everybody's behaving perfectly logically in different directions. And so I do think that the best possible alignment is towards shareholder value. And the more people that are incentivized to create that thing. Now, that can be hard too, because in the short term, shareholder value can be assessed on pure assets minus liabilities, which is really a consideration for a more cash-based marketing versus like trying to define it as a potential liquidation as a TTM multiple or a multiple of TTM EBITDA. So there's complexity around definition of shareholder value that I think it's the responsibility of leadership to define how we're going after it together, and then to communicate that to the board and shareholders and create alignment around it. But whatever that is, as many people as possible that are financially incentivized to go make a big return by moving that number up for the organization, the better. And I think that so often the scrutiny that organizations put themselves through on analyzing channels and behavior of people would be best spent on just taking really smart people and looking at their financial incentive and make sure it's aimed in the right direction and let them run, and then hold them accountable to the result. Because it's just, and it's really hard to get right. It's really, really hard because the dynamics change a lot. But when you find unmotivated people or frustrated people, it's often because they're being asked to do something that's counter to their own benefit, and nobody's going to do that. So I don't know. We could probably do hours on that one, but it's hard.
Makes sense. Thank you.
And I'll even say, like with you guys, like, so we're talking, and one of the things I ask all the time as an outsider when I come into the organization is my primary point of contact, how are they financially motivated? Because what'll so often happen is we'll be making these recommendations only to find out that our recommendation is directly counter to their own financial incentive. And you're like, why is there friction? Why is this so hard? And it's like, oh, well, because this person makes a bonus if top line revenue grows 8%, and I'm over here recommending that we pull back spend. Like that's going to create tension, you know? So I think it works with outside vendors too. It all ties together. All right, 10 minutes, go ahead. 10 minutes left. I'm going to go through some rapid fire things that I think come up a lot in conflict inside of organizations. One is, and I want you both to think it in your head and see if you say the same thing, because this is one where people get it wrong a lot. What revenue definition does the organization work off of on a daily basis?
You want us to say it at the same time?
Okay, so Tanner said net sales. George, that sounds like a
Net
nightmare
sales.
if I'm a marketer.
I would say gross sales. That's what
I would almost say, when I think about marketing, I think about order revenue. So gross sales less discounts. That's generally what I'm thinking about for our marketing. I have to, because my teams also do supply chain and things, and we deal with returns. I've got to think about that on a net basis, net of returns.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I can let Tanner dictate that in the Domo dashboard. So whatever number he wants us to look at, they
well, that's the key. So this is so important. What is the number in the Domo dashboard, Tanner? What is it?
There's actually both. Depends on the screen you're looking at. We'll do order revenue in some, we'll do net sales in some. So our daily profit, though, which is kind of what we live and die by, is based on a net sales number, and it's an adjusted net sales, because what you see in Shopify from returns doesn't necessarily match how generally accepted accounting principles deals.
So you accrue it on an estimated basis, right?
Yep.
Which is okay. So we could do a whole episode on this topic, because there's nothing more destructive inside of organizations than, and the amount of hours when we try and do data alignment around this topic alone is insane. So I'm going to say back to everybody a few things that they said to highlight why this becomes complicated. So when I say different revenue definitions, what I mean is, from an accounting standpoint, you generally move from gross sales minus discounts to what would be called order revenue. In Shopify, they do this horrific thing that I think has been really bad for our industry, which is they report primarily on total sales, which is order revenue minus discount or minus returns. So it includes shipping and tax, but it just takes out returns. They call it total sales. It's a made up term. It's not an accounting term. And then if you take out shipping and tax, you get all the way down to net sales. So any one of those could be the number that an organization is reporting on. And oftentimes they're setting targets and there's two people talking to each other and they're saying completely different things that are off by meaningful percentage points, right? And so you have people moving in different directions. But the reason why I think the daily operation of an organization should be done at the order revenue level is really highlighted most simply by the month of January. A lot of times, if organizations especially are not accruing returns estimations, which I think is, again, another best practice, whole separate topic, what happens is January is you have a really big December, and then all of a sudden you get a bunch of influx of returns where the rate of return is still the same, but the volume increases against the depressed January revenue. And all of a sudden your MER on net sales looks really bad and everybody's freaking out. The amount of times I've dealt with this specific scenario is insane. And because returns that lag relative to previous sales cause a bunch of problems. So that's why I was curious. Order revenue for the win. Shopify, please fix this. Okay. Who is responsible for the financial forecast for the month of July? Whose name is on the number?
Both.
Yep.
Come on.
Go ahead, tell
That's a
them,
classic
Tanner.
rule. If multiple people are responsible, no one's responsible. Come on. Who?
Tell them what we eat if we miss it.
I'm not going to say that on this webinar. Yeah, the reality is, Taylor, so, kind of like our annual forecast, we do this similar thing in our S&OP meeting on a monthly forecast. Marketing brings their model for retention and acquisition revenue. Supply chain brings their model for kind of a velocity-based revenue, and then we'll triangulate together. We then own that. I would say marketing, to an extent, has been more correct with their forecast recently, and so they're probably getting the most amount of leverage in that meeting right now.
That's great.
Is that fair, George?
That's fair.
How do you guys, how close to target is success? So we at CTC, we use plus or minus 10% equals success. What do you guys use for definition of success in forecasting?
Same, plus or minus 10%. We preferably on the plus side.
For sure. And in terms of advertising budget, what is the governing behavioral principle? Like, if I could drive contribution margin up, but maybe that comes at an expense to MER, but the overall dollars go up. Does that rule? Do contribution dollars win, or is there a percentage efficiency expectation that sort of acts as a governor to spend?
I think contribution dollars wins. I will say, like, yeah, we have targets, right, for each month that this is the X amount of contribution dollars that we want to produce, and we just try to hit that number. And that's evolved over the last year. So
yeah, and I would say if there is a skew, it's skewed towards probably revenue growth at our minimum, at our minimum profitability level, right? That probably, it skews that way.
That's great. So then if marketing is doing the forecast, do they also get to set the initial advertising budget? Is that also within your control?
The way we do it, Taylor, is we do the retention cohort forecast first, and then there's a contribution dollar that comes from those customers. And then we use that dollar to determine budget. And okay, this is what we're going to spend at X efficiency target. This will leave us with the ideal contribution target. So that's the way we set the budget.
Yeah.
Do you think about
add to that? It's very, it's really a performance-based budget too, and it will audible daily, right? If things aren't performing well, we'll modify, and if things are performing well, we'll spend more than we anticipated. So we're willing to flex up with performance on that.
Okay, great. All right, there's a question here that I think relates to this topic. So this is from Mark Brown. He says, with growth goals in mind, is product expansion an increase in LTV and print contribution profit play, or additional acquisition and new audience funnel with its own CAC target, or some mix of both? Like, what role does product expansion play for you guys in the business?
Yeah, Mark, great question. I would say both. Frankly, a lot of growth that we're seeing, that we're hearing about, is coming from new product and the ability to take people and try to turn them into customers of, if I bought bed sheets, I want that customer to also buy pajamas, or I want them to buy pillowcases, or whatever, right? So I think a lot of growth comes from newness, at least for us, especially on the apparel side. And even on the bedding side, you come out with a new color, that color outperforms core historical colors. So at the same time, you know, there's only so many people trying to buy sheets at any given moment, but more people trying to buy apparel or bath or loungewear, sleepwear. So we use it both for acquisition and for kind of retargeting current customers.
Yep.
George, what's one piece of advice you'd give to a growth marketer to improve their relationship with their CFO?
Yeah, great question. It's hard because Tanner and I have had a good relationship since day one. You know, like you mentioned, we shared a lot of interests, and on a personal level, we're pretty good friends. But I think just dedicating time, you know, to explain the way you approach things, the way you think about things. And yeah, I think just as you do that and you take time to listen to how they think about it, like the relationship improves and you're able to have productive conversations. I think that's something Tanner and I have gotten pretty good at over the years.
Tanner, George comes to you with a big marketing initiative. He wants to, I don't know, buy a golf course, do something crazy. What's the hurdle rate in your head for what kind of return you want in order to greenlight it?
Yeah, it's always going to be, is it going to be net positive contribution margin? That's pretty much the conversation we have on any spend. You know, if we're going to spend $14,000.
What if I say yes in 24 months?
I would ask is there a better use, a better, more immediate use of those dollars? Like, could we drive that contribution margin quicker by doing something different? And the answer often is like, I don't know. Like, there might be something that comes up tomorrow that's better than this opportunity today, but you know, that's where you have to kind of look at the opportunity cost of that. I would say, are willing to test about anything. And so if we think there's a chance that there's a channel that could work, or a platform that could work, or an attribution tool that could give us some insight, we'll test about anything, with the expectation though that there is a return over a certain period of time. So if it creates positive contribution dollars, we're generally going to do it or test it. Obviously, comparing it against the other opportunities we have to put that capital to work.
George, is Cozy Earth hiring? Anonymous attendee wants to know.
Always. I mean,
Gotta keep that OpEx lean though. Gotta keep that.
Yeah,
George likes to spend those marketing dollars. I don't know if there's room on the OpEx.
You want to keep the OpEx lean, but we are always hiring customer support staff. We actually have a kind of a funny system here. We hire a lot of our employees from our customer support team after they've, you know, worked in that for a few years and we've gotten to know them, or a few months even. But anyway, yeah, we're hiring. Shoot me an email. There might be a fit.
Yeah. Always looking for good people, you know, always trying to get rid of bad people.
Yep.
Awesome, guys.
That's not necessarily true. We pretty
Yeah.
much have to keep people and give them opportunities, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey guys, I appreciate it so much. Thank you all for hanging out. Hopefully, I think there was a really simple, beautiful answer there at the end. At the end of the day, what we're describing is a human relationship between two people, a CMO and a finance. You can categorize them however you want, but at the end of the day, if you can develop a relationship with a human being, become friends, find shared interest, develop trust, this is going to do a lot of work to create the lubricant in the organization for the information to flow easier, for questions to be asked without fear of being laughed at or mocked, or et cetera, et cetera. And so that is a big piece of it. Rohit, you want to close this out?
Yes, sir. First off, I'm dropping this gem down here that Taylor mentioned early on. Sample P&L design built by Taylor and the Common Thread team. I appreciate you guys for putting it together. I know a lot of the folks here could probably find use out of it, and we can possibly share it out if Taylor's okay with that after as well. And lastly, thank you to Taylor, Tanner, and Georgie, whichever you prefer, for coming on today. Really appreciate it. A lot of great insights, and you guys just crushed it. We're doing the next one on August 8th. It will be on unlocking first order profitability with the Hexclad team. And, you know, we'll be giving you all first access. So watch out for that email. But again, appreciate you guys for coming on. Thank you for joining in. Hopefully there were some nuggets in there that you guys found helpful.
Yep.
Love it.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you guys all next week. The best thing you can do is invite a friend next time. Like you said, we got the Hexclad team coming on. We're going to be talking about a category with even worse LTV than bed sheets and how important it is to pursue first order profitability. But yet you can do it at scale. There's a lot of myths we want to bust about the D2C business model and how to do it in a way that you can get big and profitable without having to do it in these in only in perfume or beauty. There's lots of other places to make it happen. So appreciate all of you. Rahid, thanks for making this happen.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Taylor.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.